Hello, everyone, and welcome back to CyberTalk. I am your host, Mike Shelah, Director of Marketing and Business Development for Advantage Industries. And with me today, I have David Linthicum, who is the Chief Cloud Strategy Officer of Deloitte Consulting. David, thank you so much for being on CyberTalk today. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, me as well. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. And I love the fact that you are the cloud strategist. I think everybody listening knows the joke, there is no cloud, it's just somebody else's computer. But along with that, cloud took a revolutionary step forward when COVID hit 2.5 years ago, because people that weren't embracing and relying on cloud infrastructure now had to. Even companies that were hybrid really hadn't devoted their strategy, their infrastructure, their action plan to the cloud mindset. So I'm curious if we could start there. What have you seen change from a cloud standpoint now that we went from a business world that was probably 30% virtual to probably now is 70 to 80%?
Yeah, and it's going to remain very close to that. So I think there's going to be some return to the office, and certainly you're back to traveling, but not as much. And the ability to have a distributed company as well as a distributed workplace is really the path forward. And cloud did a few things. Number one, it allowed these organizations who were virtual suddenly and didn't anticipate being there to scale. So in other words, we're able to add additional VPNs and add different workloads and get the people who are working remotely productive as quickly as they could. And the other thing is it reduced vulnerabilities. In many instances, I found during the quarantine that some companies couldn't even get into their data centers to fix problems. And so having their own equipment and having their own enterprise data center caused unto itself a vulnerability because they couldn't depend on a person getting in there for one reason or another, either a quarantine issue or another health scare or some sort of a legal issue. And so they're trying to remove these vulnerabilities and trying to provide the ability to scale. Cloud computing was long known as the technology to leverage to do that. And so suddenly there was a mass movement, into the cloud. The way I described it, when the pandemic first took off, is we kind of went from 50 miles an hour to about 80 miles an hour in about 2 months' time. So suddenly, everybody was moving in the cloud, moving their workloads in the cloud, trying to get their security policies right, governance policies right, trying to move as quickly as they could, which they're still moving today, but also do so in the right way where you're not going to cause more damage than good.
Yeah, and forgive me for not starting here, but I think everybody knows the name Deloitte, but I don't think people get the scope of what Deloitte does. To say that your company has a robust portfolio of services for your, and I think that's why most people call it Deloitte Consulting now, because that's where your organization is first and foremost now, correct?
Yeah, it's obviously does audit and finance is the base of the business, and that's how it got started. But a tremendous amount of the business is focused on advising and becoming a trusted advisor around leveraging new technologies, cloud computing really kind of being front and center, but also, AI and IoT and edge-based systems and, smart factories and smart cities and, all these things that are really kind of cutting edge. It's trying to figure out where things are going to go and advising clients in tactical ways and step-by-step ways and how to get there. And obviously, any kind of change and disruption that occurs out there in the marketplace, consultants, are always there to help, and they typically benefit from that. So it's the ability to get organizations on the right track, providing the right advisory, providing the right tactics, leveraging the right architectures, and also double checking some of the work that the enterprises are doing. And that's kind of the role that we play.
Yeah, so that's a great segue into my next question. I think one of the most interesting aspects about cloud is how it fits in with compliance frameworks. To say that the business world is not appropriately embracing things like NIST and GDPR and CMMC and HIPAA and PCI and any other acronym that you want to throw out there is an understatement. I've probably interviewed somewhere around 200 business owners in the last 2.5 years, and I can count on one hand how many of them said, yes, we're following this framework and we're evolving so that we can continue to maintain that. Most of them are like, what are you talking about? And even everybody knows HIPAA is for medical practices, but the number of medical practices that are like, well, what are you talking about? Well, my software is HIPAA compliant, so I'm good. I'm great. I'm glad to hear that your software is, but that's one very small piece out of a very big pie to truly call your organization compliant with a specific framework. So I'd love to get your thoughts on how cloud fits into a framework. We don't have to pick an acronym, but you can if you like, if there's one that you really enjoy discussing. But how does cloud fit into compliance frameworks?
Yeah, the way I like to describe it to my clients, even doing some public speaking, is make compliance somebody else's problem. And so if I'm able to outsource compliance of data, which is largely why HIPAA exists, data integration also, but your ability to let somebody else take that over has expertise in doing that and make it their problem. In other words, leverage industry clouds, verticalized clouds, things like that, to get to compliant data models and basically remove you from the process. That really should be the play that most enterprises are looking for. You're going to drive yourself nuts if you're trying to live audit to audit. And even if you're a compliance officer and you have the existing developers to make it happen, it's just going to be something that's unobtainable, your ability to be 100% compliant. So ultimately, in leveraging cloud, you leverage cloud as a force multiplier to leverage the right data models, the right security models, the right security parameters, with processes that are pre-built to understand how compliance is going to work. And you leverage what I call compliance on demand, or even compliance as a service, where I'm not going to do this anymore. And so I'm not going to maintain, 1,000 people in the organization who are going to help me supervise an audit, say if we're in the healthcare world or the finance world and things like that. But I'm going to leverage core processes from people who provide them, who can ensure me compliance and will provide compliance as a service for me, even support the various audits because they do them every day, and make it their problem. And I think that's kind of really, if you think about it, it's the theme of cloud computing. It's, let's not own a data center, own hardware. Let's leverage somebody else's data center and hardware. And then let's build on processes and business models that other people create and are better at creating than we are, because they're creating it for 1,000 or 15,000 different organizations versus just my organization, which is creating it for one. So it's plugging into the utility model. And one of my old bosses used to say, make simple things simple. And that's really what it's about. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think you struck the nail on the head there. I'm working on an article right now that I put a hypothetical out. I said, just imagine for a moment that you're a CISO with 20 years of experience and you've worked at 5 different companies in that 20-year period. And let's just say, for conversation's sake, at each one of them, you implemented the compliance framework project. So you did the evaluation, you did the plan of actions and milestones, you did the remediation work, you had a third-party company come and review so to verify that you've hit all the control requirements, that you've documented the policies and procedures manual, and that you're actively maintaining and managing that. So just pretend for a moment that's the qualifications of a person. When you go to a cybersecurity company, and as you said, get it as a service, you're talking to a company that's done that 5 times just in the last couple of months. And the depth of experience and the economies and the efficiencies, that's one of my favorite conversations to have with leaders is, look, I'm not saying that your people on staff aren't smart and talented. I'm saying that you don't have the time or the expertise to get this done in the time frame that is ideal for your company. And if you're taking your inside engineers that you're paying 6 figures plus benefits to be there to do these things, well, you're taking them away from work that generates revenue for your organization. And I love how cloud fits in there. So I'm guessing that you have an opinion on multi-cloud strategy. So, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on multi-cloud strategies for businesses.
Yeah, it seems to be the de facto standard. Either you're going to go to multi-cloud or multi-cloud's going to go to you. And, and what we're finding in the research, and certainly within my client base, 95% of the organizations out there are running plural clouds. And so it's not just private cloud and public cloud, which is a hybrid cloud, but it's running multiple public clouds.
Sure.
Even the big majors that are out there, the hyperscalers, AMD, Amazon, Microsoft, Google would be an instance of that. But also some of the discount clouds that we see emerging, people who just do storage and may just do healthcare compliance and healthcare data models. And ultimately having a portfolio of services which exist in the enterprise, that anybody within the enterprise building something can leverage this technology for any reason at any time to solve particular problems. And the motivators are something I don't think most people anticipated. The reason enterprises move to multi-cloud is they're looking for the ability to have best-of-breed technology to the innovators within the company. So I don't want to limit my developers by having only a limited number of databases that are associated with a particular public cloud provider. I want to leverage all the databases from different public cloud providers based on the need. So if I have an AI engine that's going to be provided by a particular cloud provider that may not be the majority cloud provider we leverage, that's okay. And the ability to make all these things work and play well together and have them into an operating model where they're sustainable. In other words, the trade-off is going to be, if we're leveraging multi-cloud, we're going to more complexity. We're going from 2,000 cloud services under management to 10,000 cloud services under management. And by the way, all these different pods, people who are developing these systems are operating independently, thinking independently, and building their own best-of-breed technology. So now we have not only a complexity problem, but a heterogeneity problem. In other words, all kinds of databases, all kinds of security models, all kinds of governance systems, all kinds of different things are in there. So how do we manage that in a consistent way, which is going to provide cross-cloud services? We're able to maintain standards in security and governance and, operational efficiency and things like that. And that's the really problem to solve. So the reality is, as we move into multi-cloud, you have to think in terms of cross-cloud. So it doesn't become as important as to what the clouds are doing under themselves, an individual cloud provider, but my ability to leverage solutions that not only span the different cloud providers I'm leveraging, the hyperscalers, the discount cloud brokers, the SaaS providers, all kinds of things out there. People typically are leveraging 100 different clouds today within an enterprise. But also the ability to include my enterprise systems, my traditional systems, and even my specialized systems, edge computing, the ability to deal with hospital scanning devices, diagnostic systems, things like that, and have them under their own layer of abstraction where I'm able to deal with security, I'm able to deal with storage, I'm able to deal with compute, I'm able to deal with governance, and to your point, I'm able to deal with compliance under a single layer where I'm not going to be impeded by the number of things, the number of APIs, the number of interfaces that are staring at me. I don't need to maintain individual talent for every piece of technology that's leveraged just because we think it needed to be leveraged. I'm being smarter about this. I'm hiding those things behind other abstraction layers where I'm able to manage these things within some sort of a centralized authority, and really kind of the old idea of a single pane of glass, able to see it, challenge it, work it, and hopefully do so with less people and less time, less money, and more success.
I heard early in that you said something that I want to emphasize, and I want to dive a little deeper into it. I'm going to use HIPAA as an example. So depending on the size of your organization, let's use your typical hospital, 500-ish employees, IT.
Not around here. They're 5,000 around here.
Yeah. So that's an excellent point. Are you talking about a single standalone hospital? Here in Maryland, LifeBridge has really become a network of medical professionals. So they probably have 100 buildings across all of their campuses, and it's probably north of 5,000. So that speaks to that complexity that you were referring to. But the idea that there could be a cloud environment that specifically is for HIPAA, so that strategically the medical community can embrace it and say, by doing this, I now check off a dozen of the control requirements that fall under HIPAA, and that reduces my burden significantly. So it doesn't make me compliant, but it takes a nice chunk of it. And I'll dovetail that over to the PCI world. I talk to businesses all the time that say, oh, well, my credit card provider provides my compliance. I go, no, your credit card provider provides compliance for what they do, so that if there's a breach, they're not going to be sued. But that doesn't remove you from the obligation of following this framework. So I love that idea that cloud environments for specific industries are a growing trend. And I'm guessing you're getting that feedback from your clients, and that's how that came about?
Yeah, it's called industry clouds, and it's starting to emerge. The bigger cloud providers are investing in those areas right now, and what they're doing is partnering with SME organizations, healthcare organizations, people who do finance compliance and finance processing, and not only building compliance processing, but really kind of building very fine-grained services and fine-grained data models to support a particular industry and how you do manufacturing and retail, things like PCI compliance that includes processes, which was missing from your client, inside the organization, and their ability to manage data differently and in a compliant way from the complete supply chain of how you deal with information from the origin, to the production of information. And this, I think, is going to be an ongoing trend, because now that we're outsourcing storage systems and compute systems and databases, things like that, why not outsource a lot of the things that we seem to be reinventing within the organizations? One of the things that kind of took me back when I used to work in the healthcare field years ago was the fact that all of my clients, people who were healthcare providers, they were all building the same thing. And so they had oceans of developers that are sitting in buildings that are, building the same processes that are being built by, 10 other, healthcare providers. And more power to them. I understand where they're making the investment at the time, but why not combine that IP into some sort of a centralized cloud-based system where we can provision as a service and do so in a fine-grained way where we're not, in essence, getting all or nothing. We're not getting their data model and getting all of their processes. We're able to take bits and pieces of it, as we need them and as we're able to find them, and assemble them into solutions which will maintain the industry best practices, maintain the industry processes, and maintain the industry compliance for us. But we're able to orchestrate these things in ways that are really more customized to the business. And so what they would say early on is we need these ocean of developers because what we do here is unique. We feel that we're going to have unique software to solve our unique problems. When I look at the problems, maybe 10% of the problems are unique, 90% are not. And
that
so
is
why are you building? Why are you
reinventing
reinventing the wheel? In between these various providers. And even when cloud computing first hit the scene, we had this thing called community clouds, where we could have clouds that are around particular industries, such as, and this kind of fell by the wayside, such as healthcare and manufacturing, things like that. Now that concept's coming back. Now that we kind of focused on the horizontal aspects of it, things that are basically providing as infrastructure, industry-specific services, and the ability to leverage this. And like I said, making it somebody else's problem. And that's the best way to do business. And you had hit something very profound a few minutes ago. I'm able to save money there by not making it my problem, and I can invest that money in other areas. They're going to allow my business to inflect and be more disruptive. So I'm going to invest in innovation in healthcare. I'm making net new technology or net new ideas versus just solving ideas that have already been solved. That just drives me nuts. We're spending too much time and money on that.
Yeah, I did a presentation earlier this week about, it's called Stop Being Cyber Stupid. and I close out the presentation with, how do you choose a compliance framework? Now, a couple are a little obvious. If you are in healthcare, HIPAA's a smart place to start. It might not be the only framework you follow, but that's a smart place to start. If you're in retail, you're starting with PCI. Might not be the only. Again, if you're a government contractor, CMMC. If you have business clients in Europe, then you should be following GDPR. And I threw out some other fun wrinkles, like New York has the New York Shield Act, and I think California and Texas and one of the Carolinas also has a similar law on the books that basically, hey, you do business in our state, you got to follow our laws.
They all have something, by the way.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. New York seems to be one of the most prolific, maybe is the word. But yeah, they all do. That's an excellent point. Every state has some sort of laws they expect you to follow around cyber. And I say, well, the good news is, overwhelmingly, these are all built on the National Institute of Standards and Technologies, or NIST, specifically 800-171. So you can't go wrong starting there, because like you said, it does start to create these wonderful efficiencies out in the marketplace. So I'm curious, when you talk with your clients, I'm guessing which framework's right for me is a conversation that comes up a lot. So how do you guide people through that? How does another CIO listening to this show say, well, which framework should I be following, other than those couple of obvious pegs we filled in?
Yeah, it depends on the vertical that you're in, of course, the industry that you're in. We talked about that, but it also comes down to understanding your specific needs and the problems that you've already solved. So it's always going to be, client dependent. And I know people hate the, typical answer that consultants give. Well, it depends. But it does depend. It depends on where you are in your journey, where you are in innovation, and what you're probably lacking in some of the core processes, and how you can reinvest capital in different ways where it's more strategic to the growth of the business and brings home shareholder equity, which is why businesses exist, and to support the investors. So the framework would be, number one, understand that, and then survey the market as to what's available. And this is before you build something. And I don't know how many people skip this step, and it's not that hard in the days of the internet. Yeah, and they go right to building something. And the reality is that, again, you can get 90% of that stuff out in some of these on-demand systems. They're already built in the cloud. Either the major cloud scalers have them, or they have some other niche cloud provider, which focuses just on healthcare and manufacturing and logistics and supply chains and things like that. And then figure out how you would assemble these things into a solution that would match the expectations for your business is going. In other words, define what your business processes should be to maximize and optimize what these things are, and look for areas to play components of these solutions. And don't be afraid about the complexity of it, because we can deal with the complexity on the back end, different operational abstractions and things like that. But get to things where it's making as much of these things within the environment somebody else's problem. It's outsourced to another organization that's better equipped to deal with them than you are. So they have, 10 lawyers who are dealing with compliance situations. They're building software that 10,000 companies are going to use, and they obviously have to limit their liability. So they're going to make darn sure that it's the best it can be. You're not going to be able to replicate that level of functionality at the enterprise level. And the more companies are able to do that and continuously improve as they go on. So in other words, we're never going to get to a point like, well, this is it. We got our solution. We're going to live like this for the next 2 years. The reality is it should be continuous improvement, continuous evaluation, continuous, outsourcing some of the processes that we've discussed, which is the way you want to go, or even insourcing some of the things we find out just didn't work out. We gave it over to a provider. They didn't live up to the expectations. They missed their SLAs on that. And so we took it back and we went ahead and built it, or went with a different provider. And so as long as you're understanding that it's going to be a journey where this continuous improvement, this continuous change is going to be there, we're going to get better and better and better and better and better. We're going to iterate through this. You'll be okay. If you try to think you're getting to a state solution where, okay, we got it, we invested our $10 million and we're on the road for the next 10 years just operating the thing, that's never going to work. Stuff's going to break. You have to fix it. And people's expectations are just off on that, because we're used to the big bang stuff back in the 70s and 80s. We built big honking systems. we rolled them out, and they served the business for, typically a 10 to 15 year lifespan, more than that in many instances. Some of them are still running. That doesn't exist anymore. Very fine-grained components that come from outside the organization. They're typically not going to be hosted by you. Your data shouldn't be hosted by you. You're dealing with changing dynamic compliance issues, changing dynamic market issues. You have to have the ability to shift and be agile. And that's why people are dependent on cloud.
Yeah. So once again, you brought up something that I think is a key moment for our audience to take away, which is that determination process might be forced upon you, not just by your industry, but it might be forced upon you by your clients and other strategic partners. So I know you know this. As companies get bigger, satisfying the requirements of your cyber insurance policy become more arduous. I spoke to a nonprofit in DC a couple months ago. They had a 72-page response that they had to fill out in order to renew their insurance. And with that, we brought a client on 2 years ago to do CMMC for them. And about 6 months in, they said, wait a minute. Okay, now we need FedRAMP because there's another bid that's specifically requiring FedRAMP in order to win it. And so that's a great conversation that have an audience with the people you do business with, because I'm willing to bet over half the companies that do business with a hospital or other medical entity don't realize by definition they're a business associate and they should also be following HIPAA, because otherwise in the event of a breach, they're going to be found negligent.
Yeah, all that should be built in the processes, and understanding, what your responsibilities are, and getting the right advice. That's the big thing. Will keep you out of trouble. I guess the insurance is kind of a nice little audit thing, because they're going to make sure that they're not going to insure you if you're doing dumb things.
Yeah, it used to be you could sign a waiver and they would give it to you anyway. And now it's like, look, if you're not doing these 25 things or these 30 things or these 40, we're not even going to insure you. Period. End of story.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's smart. It probably means you're nowhere near doing best practices in terms of how you do security, and aren't able to survive an audit if you're in an auditable space like finance and healthcare. So, the big thing is keep an eye on the strategy as to where you're looking to go. And so, in other words, if the business is looking to move in this direction, we need to put these sorts of processes in place. And how do we do that most effectively and efficiently? And how to reduce risk as much as we can? And you're right, as far as the stakeholders go. It's by the way, boards of directors and investors who are more interested in, starting to remove the risk, because they're the ones who are going to suffer the, it's not the staff employees in the company unless they own a lot of stock. It's going to be the large investors who invest in the company, or even a publicly traded company, the people who bought it on the public market. So you're always beholden to them. And I always think about that when I'm, setting strategies for clients. Like, even though I'm dealing with a management team, ultimately this is about serving the investors or people who invest in the company. So you have to look out what their needs are, and they're looking for you to grow the business, reduce the risk, do more with least amount of cost, but do so in a way where you should be managing the business with your money and looking for the enabling technology to get you there.
Yeah, I brought a client on last year, a mental health facility, and during discovery, we said, because we were talking to the controller, which was a little unusual, certainly not completely, because as you know, finance and technology work very closely together when it's done right, at least. And so, we said, what brought you to us? And she said very candidly, one of my board members said, hey, I'd like to see your HIPAA manual. And she didn't have one. So she reached out to us. Her first ask was, can you write us a policies and procedures manual? Like, that's usually not the first thing we do. But sure, we'll work with you on that. There's a lot of other, I could write a book that just says you're not ready. That's not going to help you a whole lot. It really is about getting the infrastructure in place and then documenting all of that as well. So that's a great point, because your board of directors can be a source of influence or pressure, as your shareholders might be looking at your organization saying, we're in fill in the blank industry. How are we not following this framework? That's bad business. So keep your ears open for those things. So, David, the last thing I want to get your perspective on, this has been a fantastic conversation, thank you for that, is the workforce paradigm. So everybody's claiming there aren't enough good people out there. And in technology, there's an interesting wrinkle to it, because you can't just jump into technology. You have to have a minimum of a bachelor's degree to really get after it. And, most of the people that are hitting the streets these days have a master's as well, with a specialty in, cybersecurity or compliance frameworks or ethical hacking, however you want to slice it up. And we're hearing this conversation. We've been very intentional about growing our smart people so that we have enough to support our end clients. And the other side of that is there's this coming wave every year of young, educated professionals that just need an opportunity to be in the field. And so the paradigm that I'm seeing is if you want to solve the problem, it's not either or. It's not just I need people with a depth of experience or I need young talent. You should be looking for both simultaneously. If nothing else, it's great to pair up an experienced mentor with a young one coming right out of school that's got the chops and has seen it. And the other thing we're saying to the schools is, better prepare these students, because sure, they've got the academia, but teach them how to work. Because when it comes to technology, there is a ton of collaboration. Even if you're just a coder, you're working with other coders to code. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on workforce in the cyber and IT world as it stands today.
Yeah, I think that's going to be a fundamental change that's going to happen over the next 10 years in terms of how we make and deploy technology professionals and maybe professionals in general. I think it's going to be less emphasis on formal education, and I'm like everybody else, typical, computer science education and things like that. And it's going to be more focused on getting to training people to be continual learners. So it's getting the initial skills, but whether someone comes up through a community college or someone comes up through a university or someone just basically is an autodidact and does their own training, over a series amount of time where they, wash cars or something or have some other kind of job, all that's well and good. They just need to have the chops to go off and do the job. And your ability to do that is only going to get you in probably for the first 6 months. Then it's your ability to be continuously learning and updating your skills moving forward. That's much more important to me.
Yes.
Anybody who has a very impressive education, even though I'm impressed by people who have a impressive education, I'm more impressed by people who have been in the industry for 2 or 3 years and basically got in there using their own initiative, figuring things out and reading books and stuff like that, because they're going to carry that forward. You're out of college and you're not going back. And so you have to figure out how you're going to learn initial skills, but also you're going to keep that momentum going forward. Well, these days it's a wealth of learning opportunities that are out there. The LinkedIn learning classes like I do, I even have and even the colleges and universities are doing things on demand, and they're doing things in a more tactical nature. In many instances, they're teaching people who have master's degrees, who may be changing their careers, things like that. And the amount of information that you can gather on demand and make it usable is there. So anybody with the initiative, I think, can be successful moving forward. So the workforce is going to be, for us, I think, initially changing our expectations on what we're looking for, and not necessarily always going for the traditional college degrees, even from particular universities. I found that issue a lot. We're only recruiting from this school, but get to people who have the initiative to keep up with the technology and are looking to move that going forward, and that's going to be a variety of different personas that you're finding out there. And I think that it should be a fundamental shift in how we expect to hire people, how we expect to train people, and what we expect from people. And I would look for someone, if they're a continuous learner, I'm going to hire them 20 times more enthusiastically than I would someone who just got out of college.
Yeah, so I'll end this with a funny little story. About 10 years ago, I was on a job interview. And as you can see, I'm quite the book reader. These are real books. It's not a screen. And I said to the gentleman who was going to be my direct manager, I said, I take continuous education very seriously. I've read like 200 books in the last 2 years, and that's what it was when I met with him. And I said, I'm curious, what steps have you taken to make yourself a better manager and a better leader in the last year? And he got very offended that I asked him that. And he basically scolded me for about 5 minutes in the interview. And after he went silent, I said, well, Bob, you know what? I appreciate you taking the time to speak with me today, but I don't think I'm going to be a good fit. And the recruiter called me back the next day, goes, what on earth did you say to Bob? I said, I just asked him what his strategy is to make himself a better leader. He goes, really? I'm like, yeah, he got really offended. So that having that thirst for knowledge, having that intellectual curiosity about your craft and saying, I know what I don't know. I don't know what I don't know, and I want to try and know it. I think those are great points for us to take away. So David Linthicum, Chief Cloud Strategy Officer with Deloitte Consulting, this has been a phenomenal episode of CyberTalk. Thank you so much for being on the show today.
No, thanks for having me. Have me back anytime.
And for our viewing and listening audience, be sure to subscribe to us on YouTube, and you will find us on all the major podcast platforms. We are going to be on iTunes and Spotify and Stitcher and Podbean and in the Google Play Store for Samsung Galaxy phones and on Audible. And you can even ask Amazon Alexa to play the show. Thank you all so much for joining us today.